Good evening, everyone. Firstly, welcome to the Performance Summit. For those of you who are just joining now, this is our first virtual summit organised by Launchmetrics to discuss the future of brand performance in the fashion, luxury and beauty industries. We're on to our final discussion for the day, so thank you to everyone who has joined us throughout so far. The session will focus on an opportunity for sustainability, rebuilding a more environmentally conscious industry. So speaking on this topic today, we have a really great panel of experts who I know all have some super interesting insights to share. And moderating, we have the highly esteemed journalist and New York Times bestselling author, Dana Thomas. The session itself is 30 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A with questions that we've already collected from our social media and networks. So don't hesitate to participate on the chat, the real-time polls, and share the experience in social media through the hashtag Performance2020. So that said, I'll pass this off to you, Dana, and you can make the introductions.
Thank you. Thank you. So lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. So we have three speakers today. Three panelists. The first is Diana Verde Nieto, who is the co-founder of Positive Luxury, the company behind the Butterfly Mark, a certification awarded to luxury brands in recognition of their commitment to having a positive impact on our world. Diana's knowledge in sustainability is profound. She was instructed on sustainability by Al Gore himself at the Alliance of Climate Protection. She launched Positive Luxury with Karen Hampton, founder of the TopTable.com. And Positive Luxury uses technology to demystify sustainability and communicate a brand's action directly to consumers. Leather goods designer Anya Hindmarch has had a long love story with handbags. At 16, she received her first, a vintage Gucci, from her mother. In the late 1980s, while a student in Italy, she started importing Italian handbags to the UK and selling them via retailers. In the 1990s, she began producing her own designs and opened a small shop on Walton Street. In 2001, she made news with Be a Bag, canvas bags on which customers could have personal photographs scanned and printed. I wrote about this for Newsweek back then. It was all the rage. Since then, her company has grown tremendously, and she has won Accessories Designer of the Year at the British Fashion Awards twice and Designer Brand of the Year once. And she is a commander of the Order of the British Empire. 11 years ago, Nicolaj Reffstrup and his wife Dita took over a slumbering Danish cashmere company called Ganni, and with the idea of turning it into a smart, sustainable fashion brand. With Nicolaj as chief executive and Dita as creative director, their plan worked. By 2017, sales were $50 million. And I contributed to it with this. That same year, the Reffstrups sold 51% of the business to a private equity firm called L. Catterton. Nicolaj stepped down as CEO, but Dita stayed on as designer. Today, Nicolaj serves on the board of the Danish Fashion Institute and the Copenhagen Fashion Week. He calls sustainability a moral obligation. Now, why would he believe that statement? Why should we believe that statement? Because the numbers bear it out. Today, we produce about 100 billion garments a year, more or less. Of that, 80 billion or so are sold. The rest are destroyed before ever even hitting the shop floor. And of that 80 billion, less than 10% are recycled. The average garment is worn 7 times before it is tossed. And according to Y Closet, the Chinese rental platform in China, that figure is 3 times. Where do all these clothes go after we're done with them? Incinerators or landfill. More than 2/3 of all clothes contain polyester, and polyester is essentially plastic. It never biodegrades in those landfills. Polyester also releases millions of microfibers, plastic microfibers, with each wash, even at home. And those microfibers enter the water system, and scientists have found them in fish, in the Arctic ice, in the rain of the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and in the air of London. According to the World Bank, the clothing industry today is reportedly responsible for 20% of all industrial water pollution and 10% of all carbon emissions. 1 kilogram of cloth generates 23 kilograms of greenhouse gases. The fashion industry devours 1/4 of chemicals produced worldwide. Yes, the fashion game has changed the pandemic. Stores have been closed. We bought less as we were confined at home. But was that a temporary shift or a permanent? So with this question, I turn to you, Diana. Do you see consumer demands shifting in the near future?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me today, and so nice to see you, Dana, and actually familiar faces like Anya and Nicolaj. I mean, I think that we as consumer, we have shift in terms of going online, and digital has grown a lot. And I think there is a lot more of a conscious. So what we see in a positive luxury is that the say-do gap has diminished, but actually not enough. I think there's always going to be a desire for more. And it's going to take a little bit more time to actually completely change the mindset of this idea that, we need to buy a bit less. But what has actually been incredibly perhaps refreshing is that the last 8 months, we have been as busy as ever, because a lot of brands that we never expected are saying we actually are interested not just to talk about sustainability, but to do sustainability. And actually, there is a real shift in terms of how sustainability have moved, because traditionally is the very passionate young individuals at the bottom of the organizations shouting and screaming to the top. And we have two examples which are the exception. But what we see now, like Anya and Nicolaj, what we see now is more and more C-suite executives are wanting to internalize the externalities of sustainability and actually start looking at how the businesses can actively be more sustainable instead of talking the sustainability story. Also, what has happened in the last 9 months or 8 months has been that the investment community is actively looking at this in terms of companies, and actually it's becoming a real correlation between the value of a business and their sustainability investment. And actually, the last point I'd like to make is how also there is this perception that climate change was perhaps something that we can deny, but now we actually know firsthand that when we stop, nature has breathed, and we have seen firsthand the impact that we have in our planet. So I feel that although the pandemic is not ideal and we're back on lockdown and it's been absolutely terrible for business, I think that we perhaps are in a different trajectory, and we only have until 2050 to actually change the course of humanity overall. So, maybe this was the silver lining that we needed as a human race, perhaps not at the cost of the economic, kind of detriment that it is, but maybe the things will change.
Absolutely. Now, you recently put out a report called Bringing the Future Forward. And in it, you state that during COVID-19, luxury brands have gotten better at building sustainability in their company narrative, which I've also seen and I've written about for British Vogue. Can you give us some examples of some of the brands that are successfully implementing this?
Absolutely. We have one with us, which I'm sure Anya will be able to talk herself a lot about it. But other brands, like, for example, IWC, and this is about activating sustainability, meaning not just basically creating a collection, but actually looking at how you start driving sustainability throughout the business into the KPIs, that everyone in their job functions have a bit of sustainability to do, and actually is rewarded all the way throughout the organization to actually, get paid for their performance into transforming the business into better businesses. Right. And I think this is the biggest change that we have seen, and something that is making me incredibly proud of the work that we do at Positive Luxury. But I will let Anya talk about the absolutely terrific work that she has done in her company beyond that I am a plastic bag.
Right. Oh, thank you. Well, Nicolaj, you've been embracing sustainability in the company for several years now. And what else have you seen that's inspiring across the industry?
At the moment, I guess still being kind of in the middle of COVID pandemic and a lockdown that's kind of happening again. What inspires me at the moment is the transparency and the honest conversations you can have. Like we're all in a state of distress, so you can have really profound discussions with your peers, your industry peers, about stuff you wouldn't normally talk about, and you sense that you get an honest answer back. So it's kind of interesting. Also, you've had those discussions before. You've seen brands that try to break up with bad habits and break out of the system. For instance, with See Now, Buy Now. But because only a few brands kind of ventured into those new and innovative ways of conducting their business, you also felt that they were kind of left hanging out there because the stakeholders, like the rest of the industry, didn't quite follow suit. But this time it's different in the sense that we are all in the same boat at the moment. It's all like so we were all distressed at the moment and open to kind of break up with bad habits.
Right. And Anya, so you said recently that that digital has been a lifesaver for driving business. How did you change your strategy for this to be successful? Are there any key takeaways that brands can learn from your experience during this period?
Well, I mean, we actually a few years ago decided that the old model we had, which was very much sort of bricks and mortar, I think we had probably at our peak about 58 stores around the world, and then a big sort of franchise business and a wholesale business. And the writing was on the wall, frankly, that actually having the same store in every sort of city around the world didn't really feel that modern, mostly because, you know, there's a digital revolution that was going on. People are shopping differently. I mean, I was then and I certainly am now. In addition to that, I think the wholesale model is changing dramatically. And I think that the middleman, if you like, between the customer and the brand is you know, reforming and reshaping and in many cases struggling. So it was sort of fairly obvious but uncomfortable that we had to make a shift. You know, it's a bit like when someone invents a sword, or rather invents a machine gun when you're a manufacturer of swords. You know, actually when the digital opportunity came along, it was obvious that it was all going to change and you need to get on the front foot. And we actively and uncomfortably actually closed stores. We closed a lot of stores, and that was a really hard thing to do. It felt, you know, it didn't feel very sort of intuitive, and it felt, you know, uncomfortable, as I say. But I sort of felt it was the right thing to do, and I'm so glad we did that, because I kept looking at my kids' friends who were sort of starting businesses with one product and a website and Instagram, and thinking, I'm so envious. You know, I'm sort of whizzing to Malaysia and Tokyo and New York, and so it just felt that was the right thing to do, to sort of simplify and to go kind of direct to the consumer.
Right. And then can you also tell us what Diana brought up about your bags and the made out of plastic bottles and
well, so I mean, I should just also say that we're so proud to have been awarded the Butterfly Mark by Positive Luxury, which is also something we should talk about too, which is how do we audit brands? How does the consumer have the trust? Because there's an awful lot of greenwashing, and it's really hard to be able to communicate what you're doing, and no one is perfect. No one is perfect. Right. We're all on a journey, and we're all applying common sense and trying to do what we need to do whilst building a business. So the I'm a Plastic Bag project was sort of born out of a project we did in 2007, which was called I'm Not a Plastic Bag, which was very simply trying to encourage people not to take single-use plastic bags and to use a recyclable, you know, reusable shopping bag. I mean, it went mad, to say the least. I mean, I think 80,000 people queued in one day for that bag in the UK, and it went on and on around, wow, you know, Hong Kong, Tokyo, everywhere, until I think 30 people ended up in hospital in a stampede in Taiwan. I'm not obviously proud of that, and we stopped the project immediately afterwards. But the point is, the ambition was to raise awareness around this abuse of single-use plastic. And I think that it was effective, and it made a significant difference actually to the consumption of single-use plastic bags, you know, quite immediately. However, I went back to my day job effectively, and sort of thought, I've done that, and now I need to go back to what I do that sort of pays the bills. But there was one phrase, the phrase that we all know, which is when you throw something away, there is no away, and it kept rattling and rattling around in my head. And here we are in 2020, special year that it is, and you know, the problem is still very much there. So we brought out a bag called I Am a Plastic Bag, because of course the conversation has moved on to one of circularity of materials and avoiding landfill. It's no longer just about awareness. So we spent 2 years actually developing a fabric that actually was made out of recycled PET bottles, but was actually coated, because it behaves so much like fabric and cotton. It's coated in recycled PVB, which is we recovered from windscreens, actually, the plastic that goes between the glass and windscreens. So we've worked on that project, which is, obviously saving plastic bottles from going to landfill, and again, communicating. I think that's the important thing, just to kind of keep the topic front of mind and talking about circularity. So that's the project that Diana and I worked on, amongst other things.
Great. Well, there have been some positive impacts, like you all said, about the pandemic, that we're buying less, we're buying better. We aren't throwing, well, some people threw away a lot because they had time on their hands and they're cleaning out their closets, but we're not burning through clothes at the pace that we were before we had lockdown. But also there's been a lot of positive changes at brands that were sort of tweaking their model for sustainability, had time to really reflect and have a long think about how they were doing business, and could, because everything had come to a stop, they could actually implement new policy and new ways of doing things without it disrupting the system, because the system was already disrupted and the supply chain was already disrupted. So I think that we're going to come out of this in a better place as an industry as a whole. And what I'm wondering, Anya, is do you see this transition to things like phygital or 100% digital for shows and for presentations and for like what we're doing? Do you think that will remain in the forefront of brands? We just saw today that Gucci's going to do this crazy 15 film thing with Gus Van Sant, and will they give up on fashion shows and just move correct? Should we all just give up on shows and such things and conferences and do everything 100% digital? Or do you think when we ease out of the pandemic, will brands just return to the way it was?
Well, I think it'll be a little bit of both, because I think there's a need in human nature to interact and to be inspired and to engage and to be social, actually. So I think it'll be a bit of both. I think, however, frankly, the fashion industry was so unfashionable. It was so unmodern in many ways.
It was so unmodern.
I mean, which is the most sort of crazy unmodern industry. And
it was so stuck. And everyone said it was stuck. I know. Right? Everyone was complaining about how stuck it was.
We've been discussing it so long. And we actually, probably about 5 seasons ago, we stepped off the public, the industry show, and we started doing consumer events. And it felt so sort of dramatic to do, and everyone's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I thought, it's kind of like falling off a log. It's not rocket science, that actually the waste of talking about our shows, I don't want to criticize anyone else, but it was sort of phenomenal for 9 minutes, and you can justify it for the content and the reach and so on, but actually it doesn't feel very inclusive. So in so many levels, it wasn't really a sustainable solution. And I remember talking, not mentioning any names, I remember sitting next to someone very famous in the fashion industry at a dinner, and I was sort of saying, this is crazy, like, come on guys, we're more modern, we're meant to be inventors and being creatives. And there's a better way to just the same old way. It's the comfy coat. And she said, but Anya, I always go to Paris in September. I thought, we've lost the plot at this point, because it's not about you, it's about, So I think I think this has been an amazing moment, to your point, of, I'm over the word reset, but it's bust every rule going. And in fact, the second lockdown right now, day 1 of that here in London, it's really ripped up the rule book. Anything goes. And it gives you a wonderful opportunity to not feel, in many ways, intimidated by those sort of grand old industry types who have always done it. You feel sort of a bit embarrassed at it differently, and actually it's just there's no rules anymore. And for me, the sort of, it's all about common sense. It's how can I speak to my customers? How can I actually make their life easier? And I was talking to our lovely partners, Lane Crawford in Hong Kong, and they're like, this is amazing. We're selling online. We're not schlepping to different time zones, staying in hotels, away from our kids, away from our, our gym and all our routines. There are ways of doing this where we save truckloads of money. It makes so much sense. But of course, every so often, you need to meet to inspire, and we'll find creative ways of doing that. And there's nothing nicer than going to a really beautiful store and being inspired. And I think that we need to obviously rethink the physical, and obviously maintain all the lessons we've learned during this time.
Right. And the way that the fashion show has evolved, I've been covering the industry now for 25 years. 30. And, you know, when I first started going to the shows in Paris in the early 1990s, they went on for an hour. John Galliano's shows for Dior went on for more than an hour and a half. And they were a whole event, you know, that you sat there at tables covered with rabbit fur. And you know, but when they started dwindling down to 7 minutes flat, and that everyone just, you know, nobody was doing sketches anymore, which I always found inspiring. You know, the clothes were inspiring, the people were inspiring, everything was inspiring. Instead, everyone was just taking their cell phone and, you know, holding it up and taking pictures and then running out. I thought, this is lost its oomph. We're not getting anything. We're not getting anything from it.
It worked when they were the intermediary between the customer and the brand. And I remember talking to, you know, lots of brilliant, you know, buyers, and they would edit and they would communicate. But actually the customer's pretty savvy. They see it, they want it. They don't need to have the intermediary in the same way. So I think it's really changed. And I'm sure we'll talk about timetable later, but that's one of the other things that we as a brand, and I think so many people have done, really looked at the crazy. So we, for example, in lockdown, said this is the moment to change the timetable. So where we used to, in the olden days, have the January sales and the July sales, hopefully we don't need them full stop, but if you do, you know, they had, because people were getting, in a way that the squashed industry in the middle was having a tough time, so they were bringing the sale earlier and earlier to sort of match their like-for-likes and increase and do better. And in the end, they were doing the January sales in November and sometimes October. And the product just dropped in September. So therefore they were saying deliver it earlier. So the whole thing, out of a lack of success and modern thinking, was getting more and more ridiculous. So we've just ripped up the rule book and said, we're going to have a full season dropping in September. If we go on sale, it'll be December the 26th. And we spoke to all of our partners during lockdown, and we've just reset. And it's, you know, it's not that difficult, honestly. And it's
Absolutely.
Right.
Now, Nicolaj, you've recently launched a sustainable line of loungewear. Can you tell us a little bit more about this collection? Why now, and how it is sustainable? Can you explain the sustainable side of it?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, software, as we call it, was never a kind of a COVID response. It's been in the making for quite some time, and especially identifying a fabric that would satisfy the targets we laid out in our 2023 game plan turned out to be a challenge. Also economically, I mean, you know, financially, you want to find fabrics that are also profitable in order for them to make sure that they're viable in the long run and thus have real impact. I mean, we always try to kind of ensure that the projects we launch don't end up just as marketing gimmicks, but are also something like that we can implement in like the overall merchandise flow of what we're doing. Because otherwise, again, it won't have real impact. It will just be storytelling. Software was is made entirely of recycled fabrics, both pre and post consumer fabric. It's a brand called Ecolife, and it's made from 50% post consumer recycled polyester, PET bottles, and as far as I remember, 50% pre consumer recycled cotton. So, and on top of that, it's 75% traceable. So we have full visibility on stage 1 to 3 of the supply chain. So we kind of received life cycle assessments from all our suppliers and have tried to gather primary data from across all suppliers in our supply chain to have full overview of the environmental impact of the product. And the remaining 25% traceability that we're lacking is the raw materials stage. It obviously gives itself that. I mean, trying to figure out where PET bottles are coming from or abandoned fishing nets is tricky. It's hard to trace. But yeah, it's been hugely successful, and I guess timing was also awesome because when like the lockdown first happened, what we saw was that although we were doing well online, talking about being digital, for a couple of weeks people weren't shopping at all, which in many ways is a good thing, but I mean it's bad for business. And then it slowly kind of converted to people buying leisure wear, PJs, stuff like that, and after that tops, and then the last phase was kind of dresses. And then we kind of returned to normal life for a while, and now I don't know what's going to happen now. But it was super interesting following that transition from when the lockdown first happened, and yeah, so it's been doing well for us because the timing was just about right.
Right. And Diana, during 2020, have you seen an increase in brands coming to Positive Luxury with more interest in understanding how they can adapt their strategies and processes during this time when we like had the full stop and you could reevaluate your company?
Yes, actually, we have been, and actually sometimes to our surprise, and also I think the big shift is actually asking quite harder questions. So a lot of the existing brands and new brands that we have are actually looking at supply chains beyond supply chains. So probably the buzzword of 2021. Perhaps it's not going to be COVID. It's going to be regen or regenerative, as we probably call it, as you know, regenerative agriculture.
Right.
And you heard it here first. So I think 2021 and 2022 is going to be all about our soil and the understanding that most of our industries, and please, Nicola and Anya, forgive me, it's not about fashion, it's not about clothing, it's about agriculture, and how do we actually go back to our soil and really look at how we can really nourish that. And it's very interesting because a lot of the kind of more luxury brands that have heavy reliance on leather are looking at, and this is something that actually Anya spent probably 2 years, I think it was, researching this. It's actually perhaps we should not forget about leather, and cows are not the evil, but actually it's we need cows in order to have a really proper rotation in our soil and actually make our soil a bit more fertile, and therefore all the stuff that goes with regenerative agriculture, to replenish our soil, to have better food, and so on. So what we find personally incredibly inspiring is the level of understanding that a lot of people within companies are having, and especially at CEO level, the fact that actually the time that they have in their mandate, they do not want to go to history as the ones that have not made the change, but the ones that have made the change. And I find it unbelievably interesting to talk to all these CEOs, or some of these CEOs talking to me about agriculture when they sell handbags. And I'm like, yes, it has happened finally. So in short, I think perhaps it's been a slow year for everybody. It's been a year of change. It's been a year of adaptation. But I think the wake-up call that the US has gone out of the Paris Agreement yesterday, and the implications of that, the hope of perhaps a new government, and the, this situation, it will have an end. And I think we are kind of, everybody a bit fatigued of it all. But I think there is, what I'm finding, that although there is this kind of, okay, we had enough of this, there's amazing optimism in the future. So yeah, I guess I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. You did. So let's talk about consumers for a few minutes. Diana, how have you seen consumers determining whether something is sustainable or not? Do you see this happening more and more? If they buy because it's sustainable or not?
Absolutely. I mean, our click through the butterfly mark has increased from last year about 30%.
Wow.
In the first quarter, I don't have the latest figures today, but in the first quarter of the year, which pre-lockdown. So people are actually asking about brands. They email, they talk on social media. There is still the say-do gap. So if you look at the figures, fast fashion still, up there. But I think there is starting to become a more internalization of that. Actually, it means something to buy better. And I mean, when you look at Selfridges at the time that they have been opened with Project Earth, for example, they have been really, really successful, and it has been a lot of interactions and so on. And people are getting the courage to start asking more and more questions. So, yeah. And, the other point is education and knowledge. Through lockdown, if I get £1 for every time I hear somebody say, I have been learning about sustainability, I've done a course, I've done short courses, I've done webinars and so on. So there is an incredible appetite to keep learning about it, and that's going to keep the shift. And yeah.
Absolutely. And just to be completely self-serving, if anyone wants to learn more about it, they can read my book, Fashionopolis.
Brilliant.
to slide that in there. So we're going to take a few questions in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you all, each of you, to tell me if there was one thing in the industry that you could change today, what would it be?
I would change the system. Total system. Look, I think people are ripping the rule book, but we need to actually do it together. If we change the system, we change the industry. Just got courage. Let's do it.
I think it's about taking things away from seasons. I think that's the biggest culprit in a way. And I think we're in this sort of choppy water, if you like, between the way it used to work, seasons, and being very sort of wholesale heavy and physical. And I think probably a future where there's still going to be wholesale, of course, it'll reform, perhaps less physical. But I think there's this sort of choppy, we just got to kind of hold on tight until we get through the other side. And it's quite hard when you have a business that was in the old model to get it into the new model, especially for the really much bigger businesses. You know, that's a very choppy water. So I think there's that. And my biggest wish is that, you know, we keep the issues of the environment, which is so much more serious than COVID. And you think what we've all done for COVID and sacrificed for COVID, that we just keep it really right up our priority list. My worry is that with everyone, you know, with unemployment and businesses, you know, having a hard time, that I worry that that's going to sink down.
Yeah. And you, Nicolaj?
Yeah,
would you like
I
to
mean,
change?
I guess I think I tend to be very pragmatic and a little cynical. So I mean, to put it simply, I'd love a carbon tax. Basically, I mean, it's not only about the fashion industry overall, but there's nothing like financial punishment that can regulate human behavior. So that's my biggest wish: a carbon tax that would change things overnight.
You would.
I think so too. And I think, you know, personally, I'd love to see legislation that really holds brands across the board to sustainable goals and sustainable rules, so that, you know, they can't bend them when they sell in one country, not another. I'd love to see some across the board EU rules that just say, you know, you can't sell conventional cotton in the EU, which, or, you know, you can't throw away so many clothes. They're trying to pass that in France, where they're like they've done with you can't throw away food. Restaurants can't throw away food. They want stores to not be able to throw away and destroy clothes. And I think that that's an important point, that, you know, once we get to something like that, then brands would be forced to do it. I think basically we need regulation.
Nanny state.
And I know people are like, no, but of course they're not, because that means it costs money. They're going to have less in the way of profits, because they're going to have to spend money making sure that they meet those regulations.
But businesses adapt so quickly. I think you either have to have the carrot or the stick, but I think you need one or the other, and the stick's probably more effective, I suspect.
Absolutely. So we have questions. Of course, I can't find them now, but we have questions from the audience. Let me see if there's any in the chat box. There's chat, and there's a box called questions. No, there's no one who's asked a question yet. I was so well organized, and then I'm now not. So I can't find the questions.
Well, we're all in lockdown, not in our normal homes.
Talk among yourselves for a moment while I find the questions, because I had them up on my screen.
I think
I had them up on my screen, and then they disappeared.
Everyone's a bit discombobulated this week, I think.
Yeah, I blame the election.
I know.
Let's see. Oh, maybe something's blipped. Let's see if they're sending me the questions. A lot of fast fashion brands are launching sustainable collections. Besides collections launched, what are the best ways that fast fashion brands can ensure their processes are sustainable as possible? How can they do that? Diana, of course, you should weigh in on this, because this is your world.
Well, I mean, the problem with fast fashion is the number of items and the quality of the clothing. So it's about changing the business model. So clothing has to be perhaps better quality, much more durable, resist at least 30 wears as a minimum. And then, of course, look at the entire supply chain. So, you know, not just tier 1, but actually tier 2, 3, and 4. And have that transparency and investment into understanding their supply chains better. But the problem with fast fashion is the sheer numbers of garments that they produce at the quality, at the price that they are sold, and the quality that they are. So, I mean, that is the problem with the business model more than anything else.
Overproduction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes the barrier to consuming sustainable products is economic. And I hear this all the time when I'm on my book tour and talking to call-in radio programs, for example. They all say, but I can't afford sustainable clothes. It's always really expensive. And they cite, of course, Stella McCartney, who's a luxury brand. And I said, yes, but there's other brands that aren't so expensive. But electric cars are more expensive. Organic food is more expensive, less so than it used to be, but it still is. Is there an accessibility problem, do you think, in sustainable fashion? And how do we change that? What do you think, Nicolaj?
I think first and foremost, there's can I call it a transparency problem, or at least it's such a complex and abstract topic for most like average consumers, myself included. So that I think is probably the biggest problem. It's very, very difficult to navigate. Right. And secondly, yeah, I think you're perfectly right. I try to mention that quite often, that it's that when we try to transition from a conventional fabric to a certified recycled organic fabric, it's typically 8 to 10% more expensive than a conventional fabric. But some of the more innovative fabrics that we'd like to use or materials are up to 3 times as expensive as a conventional fabric. And that expense or that cost I cannot pass on to the end consumer. So undoubtedly there's a huge problem there, because like somebody needs to kind of take that investment. Somebody needs to bear the cost, and it's a tricky situation. It's a chicken and egg in the sense that you need some of those more innovative new materials that are coming to market at the moment, that they need to kind of build scale in order for them to achieve a more attractive price point, while at the same time we as brands, we need to kind of pay for that and accept that we will have a lower margin for a while until we manage to scale up their production. So we're in a kind of transition phase, and I hope that within the near future you will see a lot of these fabrics or products becoming available to a wider audience.
Yeah, I do too. Diana, you have a point here too?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, from a consumer perspective, today you have actually different ways to accessing clothing. So you don't have to buy them, you can also rent them. So, you know, there is there's leasing as well. So it's a huge variety of different models today that is not just about purely transactional, I want this, I buy that. So I think, yeah, and a lot of brands are looking at that as a possibility to, as a go-to market to a consumer that perhaps cannot afford to pay for good quality clothing all the time, but it's still want that variety.
Right. And what do you think on this, Anya? I mean, well, I remember that organic vegetables were very expensive, and then we got Whole Foods, and they became more available, therefore less expensive, but still premium.
Well, I think Nicola's absolutely right. We're in this transition phase, and it's kind of quite tough. And I think to a certain extent, the customer ideally would meet us in the middle. So we will take a low margin. They might need to pay a bit more, and we sort of meet until we get through. It's changing for sure. And I mean, I had a lovely moment actually when I was at the leather fair, and all the stands of all the different sort of tanneries, and leather is a fascinating subject we won't touch on now, but really interesting. But what was cool was the stand that had the least, the best credentials in terms of for the environment and for soil in particular, was the stand that was completely rammed with customers. And that was exciting. And then suddenly what happens is the other tanneries are like, well, hang on a second. So that everyone sort of strives. So it happens quite quickly, actually. Of course, the answer always is about volume. I mean, if you're going to buy 10 T-shirts in a year, buy 5 and pay double for each one. If we could try and persuade, if we can try and make it cool to wear that dress again and again and go, this is the 50th one I've worn it. That's what we need to do. But buy something really special, therefore, really think about it. And I think we need to go back to behaving how our grandparents behaved. They didn't buy a million new things. They didn't jump on planes all the time. When they did, it was special. And actually, it's just all a lot slower and more considered. And actually, I think the big companies, my final point, the big companies have a really a much easier time than Nicolaj and I, because their buying power is enormous. They can, all those fabric mills and all those tanneries will be coming to them saying, what would you like us to make? And they have the volumes to warrant this innovation and can, if you like, afford the R&D, or at least the manufacturer can, because of the volume orders they'll get. So it's happening. We just got to just hang in there and actually just make it a priority. And I think honestly, everyone I speak to really wants to, and everyone I can see is buying fewer things, beautiful things that they're quite proud of saying they're wearing a lot. So we need to make it fashionable, actually. That's where fashion can play its part. So we go full circle back.
Absolutely, absolutely. One quick last question. Some big brands have released sustainable fashion collections. And now with COVID thrown a bright light on the negative impact of mass consumption, more brands are moving towards this. Will this increase competition? Do you believe that the consumer will focus on greater company values? What do you think, Diana?
I think people are actually looking to purchase for companies that actually represents them. But I think that the incentive for companies to do this should not be the consumer. I think the incentive for companies to do this is the investment community. Because the investment community is now finally understanding that they need to invest in companies that actually can weather the longevity beyond the climate risks. And, I do agree completely with Anya and Nicolaj about the cost of R&D and innovation. And I think the companies that will win is the companies that will collaborate. But also, the investment community is looking at those innovative companies that are going through this period of transition. And I think consumers are becoming more and more savvy in terms of what they buy, and you want to buy stuff that represents you. So during when Selfridges opened, I had a conversation with them, and I asked, so what are you seeing? And they said, we have sold more luxury in this short period, comparing with other times. And I was like, is this the British consumer? Clearly, there is nobody else here but the British consumer. And the answer was yes. So the point is that it's in us to invest in those pieces, to actually look at the whole, buying less and buying better, like we have been talking about. It's just at the moment, it's like when we talk about luxury versus or premium versus, fast fashion, there's still all this kind of tension, and it should be. The reality is that people are changing, perhaps not at the speed, and not everyone is in the same economic situation to afford the better quality products. But I think that there is this appetite to get there more than ever before. So luxury brands, and I think, Ganni is probably one example in terms of not complete luxury, but just that entry point luxury. People want that, instead of they will perhaps take a little longer to get it, but actually doesn't disintegrate in your first wash.
Right. Great. Well, we are at exactly whatever time we're supposed to be. My time is 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock where you are. So I thank you so much for joining me with this. And we've had, I think, a really great conversation. And hopefully everyone will take some of these things that we've passed on and have a good reflection on it, and maybe fold some of it into their own business practices. Have a really great evening, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.